The central idea of the book is that successful negotiation isn't about relying on a single strategy or trick, but rather understanding your own strengths and weaknesses and adapting to the situation and the person you're negotiating with. Shell's message is that we all already have basic communication skills that can be refined to improve negotiation outcomes. By identifying your natural negotiation style, whether you're cooperative, competitive, or somewhere in between, you can tailor your approach to be more effective. Bargaining for advantage teaches that the best negotiators are those who can balance careful preparation with genuine empathy and strategic awareness. It's not about tricking people. It's about listening carefully, understanding others' goals, and negotiating with integrity. Whether you're dealing with a high-stakes business deal or a more casual situation, this book offers insights that will help you gain confidence and achieve better results. How personality shapes success. G. Richard Shell talks about how different negotiating styles, which stem from individual personalities, can influence outcomes. To illustrate this, Shell uses examples from both corporate and traditional cultural settings, such as a publishing executive negotiating a merger and African elders negotiating a land dispute. Despite the stark cultural differences, the core principles of negotiation, relationship building, information exchange, and mutual benefit remain constant across these contexts. He also distinguishes negotiation from other forms of communication, such as influence and persuasion, explaining that while negotiation involves exchanging valuable assets to reach a deal, influence and persuasion focus more on convincing someone to act in your favor without necessarily reaching agreement on a scarce resource. A key element of the negotiation process is understanding the role of personality, as negotiators must recognize their inherent style, whether competitive or accommodating, and adapt accordingly to achieve optimal results. Shell also mentions how important it is to set high, clear goals and transform these goals into firm expectations, which he believes leads to greater success in negotiations. He illustrates this concept with the story of Akio Morita, the founder of Sony, who rejected a lucrative deal that conflicted with his long-term vision of building Sony's global brand. By remaining steadfast in his commitment to his goals, Morita achieved far more than he had initially anticipated. Shell distinguishes between goals, which are aspirational targets, and expectations, which are beliefs in the attainability of these goals. He argues that high expectations propel individuals to take proactive steps, persist through obstacles, and enhance their persuasive abilities in negotiations. Furthermore, Shell explains the difference between goals and bottom lines. While the bottom line represents the minimum acceptable outcome, goals represent the ideal result, and focusing too narrowly on the bottom line can limit one's potential. Instead, aiming high increases the likelihood of achieving favorable outcomes. Shell provides a simple goal-setting method, advising negotiators to think carefully about the desired outcomes, set ambitious yet realistic targets, and fully commit to achieving them. By referring to established standards or norms, such as market interest rates or seniority in the workplace, negotiators can ensure smoother discussions and maintain fairness. Shell uses the example of a dispute over pigs between a borrower and lender among the Fugo people to demonstrate the importance of norms in resolving conflicts. The dispute is settled when an elder appeals to establish fairness norms, showing how adherence to standards can de-escalate tensions. Shell introduces a concept of normative leverage, where negotiators use widely accepted standards to strengthen their position and pressure the opposing party into agreement. Fairness and trust, the cornerstones of negotiation success. Shell asserts that successful negotiation is not just about securing the best deal, but also creating trust and building long-term relationships. Trust is essential in building smooth communication and easing anxieties during negotiations. The concept of reciprocity, the idea that people are naturally inclined to return favors and good deeds, is central to Shell's argument. He illustrates how this principle played out in the relationship between J.P. Morgan and Andrew Carnegie, where Morgan's fair treatment led to a mutually beneficial and lasting business partnership. Shell mentions 3 critical rules for sustaining trust: being trustworthy and reliable, being fair to those who treat you fairly, and speaking up when unfairness occurs to prevent resentment and damage to relationships. Fairness, Shell argues, is not only about the immediate gains of negotiation, but about setting the foundation for future collaboration, a point illustrated by the ultimatum game, where people reject unfair offers, even at their own expense, to uphold the principle of fairness. Moving beyond fairness, Shell also speaks about how valuable it is to understand the other party's interests to craft win-win solutions. He explains that successful negotiations go beyond achieving one's own goals and involve aligning interests with the other party's needs, as shown by the example of Kelly Sarber, who secured a deal with the city of Oceanside by understanding the city's need for beach replenishment. Shell advises that negotiators must take time to discover the deeper interests of the other party, which might not always align with superficial desires like money. He highlights psychological barriers that hinder understanding, such as confirmation bias, where individuals only perceive information that supports their existing beliefs, and the fixed pie bias, which assumes there's a fixed amount of value to be divided, limiting the potential for mutually beneficial outcomes. A negotiator's success lies in identifying shared interests, and the more skilled a negotiator is at finding these areas, the more solutions they can generate. To uncover these interests, Shell recommends steps such as identifying decision-makers, finding common ground, and considering low-cost solutions that address the other party's needs while also achieving one's own goals. A key technique to understand another's perspective is role reversal, where negotiators put themselves in the other party's shoes to better grasp their motivations and priorities. In the final discussion on leverage, Shell explores how power dynamics influence negotiations. Leverage is based on each party's perception of what they stand to lose in the event of no agreement. The party that perceives themselves as having more to lose is typically in a weaker position, as fear of loss drives them to secure a deal. However, leverage is fluid and can shift during negotiations. The secret to setting the right tone in negotiations. In these chapters, Shell elaborates on the essential stages and strategies of negotiation, pointing out that thorough preparation and an understanding of the psychological and relational dynamics involved can significantly influence the outcome. He divides negotiation into 4 key stages: preparation, information exchange, proposing and concessions, and commitment, likening the process to a 4-step dance. Preparation, the first stage, is foundational, involving not only the analysis of your own goals, but also understanding the other party's needs and perspectives. Shell categorizes 4 types of negotiation scenarios based on the stakes and the importance of the relationship: tacit coordination, competitive transactions, cooperative relationships, and balanced concerns. Each requires a tailored approach, with Shell suggesting that understanding which category your negotiation falls into helps you determine whether to adopt a cooperative or competitive style. He further introduces a concept of matching strategy and style to the situation at hand, stressing that compromise is not always the best initial choice. Shell also underscores the importance of perspective-taking, urging negotiators to consider the other party's fears and interests before entering the negotiation, as well as the need for effective communication, whether directly or through an intermediary. The second phase, information exchange, involves building rapport, which Shell deems crucial for establishing a positive environment where open communication can flourish. By building trust and understanding, negotiators can better investigate the interests and perceptions of the other party, which leads to a clearer view of how to proceed. Shell draws on examples from history, such as Armand Hammer's approach to Libyan culture and the failed negotiation between Sony and Universal Pictures, to illustrate the significance of understanding the other party's interests before advancing in the negotiation process. He stresses that the goals of information exchange are to establish rapport, probe interests, and signal your expectations to guide the conversation. The third phase, proposing and making concessions, involves bargaining, where the actual negotiation takes place. Shell emphasizes the psychological dynamics at play here, particularly the anchor effect, where the first offer can set the tone for the entire negotiation. While some suggest waiting for the other party to make the first offer, Shell advocates making the first move when you're well prepared, as it can frame the negotiation in your favor. He also discusses how making an aggressive opening can be effective when you have leverage, as it influences the other party through psychological principles like the contrast principle and reciprocity. However, Shell notes that these tactics must be adapted to the cultural and relational context of the negotiation. Tactics to close the deal in any negotiation. In the chapters where Shell explores the crucial final stage in negotiations, he stresses that the true success of a negotiation lies not just in reaching agreement, but in how effectively the deal is closed. To illustrate the complexity of this stage, Shell references the U.S.-China negotiations for China's membership in the World Trade Organization WTO, showcasing the intricacies and high stakes involved. In negotiations, one tactic used to create urgency is setting a deadline, making the other party feel pressure to act swiftly. Shell highlights how negotiators may also leverage the perception of competing offers or even employ the threat of a walkout, which is designed to apply pressure on the other side. Shell also explains how negotiators can strengthen the commitment in any agreement. He introduces the 4 degrees of commitment, explaining that agreements vary in their level of commitment depending on their nature. Smaller agreements, like informal promises, might rely on personal trust, while larger commitments, such as business deals, demand more formal measures like contracts, security deposits, or public commitments. The act of writing down agreements or using symbolic rituals, such as handshakes, increases the difficulty of backing out, ensuring both parties have something to lose if they fail to honor the agreement. Shell argues that successful negotiators always ensure that both sides are invested in the deal, making it harder to back out without facing consequences. When negotiations hit a standstill or impasse, Shell advises a strategic approach to resolve the deadlock. He suggests that an impasse often signals that one side needs to reassess its position. To break the stalemate, he recommends a 3-step process. First, stop discussing the main issues and shift focus to the negotiation process itself. Second, ask the other party for suggestions on how to move forward. And third, offer your own solutions if necessary. Shell also highlights common reasons for impasses, such as emotional escalation or conflicting priorities, and proposes strategies to deal with these, such as taking a break or making a small concession to reestablish rapport. One such strategy, the one small step approach, encourages making small gestures that can reopen dialogue, which is useful in both business and international negotiations. Shell also addresses several potential problems that may arise during negotiations, such as bad behavior, poor personal chemistry, and conflicts over principles. When bad behavior occurs, he advises negotiators to apologize sincerely, acknowledging their fault, expressing regret, and offering a remedy. A forced or insincere apology, however, can worsen the situation, deepening resentment rather than resolving the issue. In cases of bad personal chemistry between negotiators, Shell suggests switching negotiators to prevent communication breakdowns and allow for a fresh perspective. For conflicts rooted in principles, where both sides are entrenched in their positions, Shell emphasizes the importance of probing deeper into the shared values of both parties, helping to uncover common ground. He illustrates this with an example of Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, who, after a legal battle, were able to settle their differences and reach a mutually beneficial agreement once their legal principles were resolved. The moral compass of negotiation. Shell highlights the ubiquity of ethical dilemmas in negotiation, where individuals are frequently forced to weigh their own goals against their duties to others. Using real-life scenarios, he examines gray areas such as the morality of lying to secure a better deal or exploiting a vulnerable party, like an elderly seller. Through these examples, Shell emphasizes that ethical decisions in negotiation are profoundly context-dependent, shaped by situational factors and the moral framework of a negotiator. He shares the story of Sifford, a man who deceived a seller by claiming a fictitious lower price to negotiate a discount on a globe. While Sifford celebrated his success, Shell prompts readers to reflect on whether such behavior aligns with personal ethics, even if it is a widespread practice in bargaining. He cautions that small lies, while seemingly harmless, can snowball into habitual dishonesty, undermining one's moral character over time. Drawing on Aristotle's philosophy, Shell underscores that virtues and vices are cultivated through repeated actions, urging negotiators to adopt ethical habits that reinforce integrity. Shell categorizes ethical behavior in negotiation into 3 schools of thought, offering frameworks to help individuals navigate when deception may be permissible and when it crosses ethical boundaries. While these approaches are explored in more depth later in the book, they serve as a foundation for negotiators to define their personal moral codes. Practical advice for maintaining ethical standards includes preparation and the use of truthful expressions of uncertainty to avoid outright lies. For instance, a negotiator might honestly admit, "I suspect I could find this price online, but I prefer to buy here." Can we settle on $325? Shell encourages readers to establish a personal code of conduct before entering negotiations to avoid impulsive, potentially unethical decisions. Expanding on the theme of ethical challenges, Shell advises how to handle unethical tactics from others. He warns that negotiations with high stakes, unequal power dynamics, or limited chances for future interactions often tempt parties to act unethically. However, building relationships and fostering mutual respect can encourage fairness. When facing deceptive tactics, Shell advocates for vigilance and probing questions to uncover inconsistencies without resorting to direct accusations. Final notes. Shell points out that effective negotiation lies in appreciating the emotional and psychological dynamics involved. Instead of focusing on monetary results or implementing rigid tactics, expert negotiators come to the table with empathy, patience, and an open mind to listen. Through the evaluation of personalities, cultural norms, and specific social dynamics of each negotiation setting, the negotiators can develop a trusting relationship and build rapport, changing potential adversarial situations into collaborative opportunities. The book touches on how cultural expectations, gender roles, and conflict tendencies shape bargaining styles. Shell insists so much on preparation, finding out about the other party's perspectives, identities, and expectations, including cultural norms for greetings or other symbolic gestures, that such attention to detail can make a great difference in the tone and outcome of the negotiation.